everyone. Welcome to
Hi,
Dice Jailers. My name is Jordan,
I'm Bjorn.
and this week we are going to talk about fight, specifically ways in pen and paper that a DM can bring the players into the world of fighting.
Yeah, different styles, the more common ones that you experience
Mm-hmm.
or see, and sort of the pros and cons of
Yep.
each.
We're going to talk about the merits of the merits of them, what's not great about them, as
Yeah,
well as when it's like when it's really helpful and just some extra things you can do to really bring that little extra pop to whatever kind of combat that you're teeing up.
yeah, because none of them are the right way, and none of them are the wrong way.
Yep, much like everything else in pen and paper gaming, you're gonna have different things for different situations.
And you're going to find ones that you personally like better that just trend more towards your style of play.
Exactly. So hopefully some of these tips and tricks and little guidelines will help you fashion your own way of making fights fun and memorable and not a terrible, awful, slow slog. Uh,
Yeah, because slow combat is really the worst thing
yeah, it's the thing that
ever.
you hear people complain about most often, next to a vindictive DM.
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
that is inexcusable.
yeah, that's a whole other thing that maybe we'll talk about. I mean, we have before in the past.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can pull a full episode out of it, but anyway, before we actually get into the meat of the episode, Bjorn, how you been?
Pretty good. A lot of goings on this week. Working to get the Shakespeare podcast on its feet. We actually finally get to do our interviews this Sunday.
Yeah,
The weekend we were supposed to do them ended up being that hottest weekend ever,
right.
and we decided it just wouldn't be safe to have people out in the sun for that long, potentially getting heat stroke, especially for no money.
Yeah,
So doing some interviews this weekend, and then shortly after that, recording a podcast version of Much Ado About Nothing, and then gonna do a one night only readers theater radio theater
mm-hmm.
where we'll have some people sitting up there, use some public domain scripts, and just kind of have a good time doing that. And that's been fun to do, just working on different voices and getting to just read lines with people that I haven't gotten to do that with in a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun. It's been rewarding. It's scratching the itch a little bit, not enough
Right.
though. But that's for another time. What about yourself? What's going on?
I mean, it was a big weekend. Last weekend it was friends that have been on the show before saying on their
Yeah,
wedding. I officiated. It was super fun. There's a lot of effort doing the setup on Friday and Saturday morning, and then a friend of mine had a housewarming party on Sunday. And the rest of this week, I've been getting myself together back for getting ready for auditions to maybe start picking back up again. Because there
here's
is
hoping.
now some worry with the Delta variant because nope, not gonna get into that on the stream
Yeah.
because it will be too long and I will be too angry. Anyway, uh, getting myself together for being able to do theater again, and trying to go through the whole slog of auditioning. We'll see if there's a part. Uh,
Right.
and then also last night did a read for the next episode of the Ugly Radio, which
Sweet.
there are some fun new surprises that are happening with this next episode that I am not allowed to talk about yet because they haven't been officially announced. But there's some fun changes. And also I get to have the fun of keeping up my streak of being in every episode so far this season,
Hell
which is
yeah.
fun. But yeah, so doing that, getting that taken care of. I met my neighbor finally, because there's like the person that I share that wall with.
Mhm.
We just haven't met yet. They're very wonderful, wonderful person. I just happened to be standing outside after taking the trash out, and so were they. It was good.
Excellent. So yeah, but it's someone. They sound like you guys get along though, so they're good
Yes, at
people.
least in that one interaction, that one
So
little that one little encounter was enough So we
I
at
mean,
least know that we get along for a conversation for one small encounter.
so you're saying it was not a combat encounter?
This is what we're doing. No,
Yeah,
no, it was not. It was
yeah.
not a combat
That's the
encounter.
segue. That's the
that's
segue I'm rolling with.
that's how we're doing this, huh?
Yeah,
And that's how you know we don't script this nonsense.
exactly. Let's get that
So
blatant. There it
dumb.
is.
So dumb. I'm so
Yeah,
proud of you, but that was so dumb.
I'm so proud of myself.
You know, when you said you were working on puns for today's episode, I
Yep.
didn't think that the shenanigans were going to be part of the segue as well.
Oh, hey, that wasn't anything I worked on. You used the word encounter, and I went, "Oh, we're going with this."
Oh
Okay.
no.
Yeah,
I did this?
you sure did.
Oh,
You have
God.
no one to blame but yourself.
All right, I give
And
up. We're finding a new co-host for the show.
I'm proud of you.
I will just do the background stuff. Oh, that's bad. That's a fight in itself.
Yeah.
No, no, don't you use that.
You know, there were some people who had a club, but you're not allowed to talk about it. So,
Mm. So, but we anyway, for the meat of this episode, we broke down we broke down all the different ways that you can do combat into three big chunks, and there
Yeah.
are obviously different ways to do combat in tabletops.
absolutely.
But these are the three that we think are the most common, as well as the most general, so that we could fit a lot of things into these three different topics. And it breaks down, and we broke it down to combat with minis,
Mhm.
combat on a virtual tabletop, and combat in theater of the mind.
Right. And I think when you think D&D, at least for me, I think maps and minis. Like that's where my mind goes to first
And
of all styles of combat.
yeah, and a lot of people do because it's it's one of the most visually appealing things, and it's also one of the coolest things, especially if you watch Critical Role, which
Yeah.
many people, that is their entrance into tabletop gaming, is watching Critical Role. And so all of the amazing maps that Mercer comes out with that have all these minis and all the Dwarven Forge stuff, and it looks super cool. And also, as a DM, it's super fun to have a map out and give that big reveal of what they see. Like
Yes.
I've done it personally a few times because I have a number of actually, and these right here, just a bunch of dungeon tiles that are just the standard mini size, just square grid tiles.
Yep.
And they're super fun to be able to set a thing up, cover it with a towel or something, and then just voila.
Yeah, and as a player, it's really cool to have that miniature that is that visual representation of your character. Whether
Absolutely.
it's something that you bought one of the Nolzur's miniatures, the
Mhm.
official ones. Maybe it's just a miniature that you found. Maybe you went on a site like Hero Forge and you designed your own. I'm a big fan of that. I like to
Yeah.
design minis of my characters because I want to have that, and not just for the game. They become a keepsake if that character ever retires or has a great heroic death.
Yeah.
And so having those miniatures is really cool, and
Mhm.
it also helps to be able to measure out your movement, attacks, spells. Like
Yeah.
everything is really well defined in that.
Yeah, I was
And it
about to
also
say
gives,
we should definitely talk about some of the pros of using
yeah,
all of these minis and battle maps in
yeah.
the physical world.
And I would say that the biggest two pros I see, one of them is just very practical, and that is you can count squares for movement. You can
Mhm.
count them for your ranged attacks, for your spells. You can keep track easier of which enemies you're attacking and not have to remember as much. Okay, did I hit that one or that one? Like you can be aware, and you can get a better idea of what it is you're facing. I think it helps with immersion. But I think the math on it is the biggest pro. Where okay,
Absolutely.
there's no fudging anything. You know how far you can move, and if you can't get up to it to make a melee attack, and you're a melee character, you got to figure out something else to do. But I really enjoy that aspect of it,
Yeah.
of being able to see everything visually. You mentioned like the dungeon tiles. I'm a big fan either of having all maps that are already printed. Like I used to subscribe to Dungeon in a Box. I have a
Right.
ton of maps from that. Sometimes you find where you're like, oh, this is 90% of what I need for this encounter. And then you just tell people, oh yeah, that cart that's on there.
That's not
Just
there.
imagine, yeah, it's not there.
Yeah.
Imagine that that's a rock.
And
And
yeah, I fully agree with you that that is one of the biggest, like, if we had a fancy thing of graphics that I was able to put at the top of the screen, which I don't because this is live and I don't know how to do that stuff. Uh but if we had that, we'd be able to put up in that pro column like visual representation for counting. Like
yep,
that is one of the biggest pros for having things there in front of you physically with battle maps and minis. And I gotta say, one of the other things that I've noticed with battle maps and minis that has been such a great thing and a great boost for using them and making them more accessible, because that's one of the things that I would put like down in the cons
oh
column,
yeah,
so to speak, is that it is no longer as prohibitively expensive.
that's true.
Like one of the cons used to be like this, like the minis used to cost a lot,
They
and
were
and
all made
some
of
of them
metal.
still do. And
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
some in the past they were all metal, they were hard to find, they were difficult to bring around. So like if your DM didn't have the bigger place to play at, you still crammed yourself into that small place because all the DM stuff was there, and they weren't gonna pack up 50 pounds of metal things in a duffel bag and bring them over.
well, and that's the other thing about it. You know, it used to be super cost prohibitive. I think it can be to some point still,
Yep.
particularly of you need more than one bandit or
Yes.
more than one goblin, more than one skeleton. Like there are certain
Yeah.
monsters that you might need 8 to 10 of them.
Yeah.
And
But thankfully, with the advances in 3D printing, just like at home, that they are still a little expensive, but it's way less expensive than even just a couple of years ago.
yeah,
And so
um,
I think that's a big boon as well. Is just like, oh, I need more skeletons next week. Hold on, let me just 3D print another 10 real quick.
yeah, I think a fun hack on that to make it more financially accessible and also really fun for the players is I've had DMs who have used edible enemies where
Yes.
it's either
Oh,
been
that's
like
such a good thing.
yeah, like little bite-sized crackers or little candies,
Mm-hmm.
and like a boss might be a donut or
Yep.
something. And honestly, the very first time I saw it, it was a little silly. But the first time I killed something and got to eat a goldfish cracker, I went, I'm in.
Yep.
This
I like this now.
this is great. As long as you have a couple different types of snacks to differentiate
Yeah.
what's what, where you're like, okay, so the goldfish are the skeletons, the Skittles are some twig blights, and
Mm-hmm.
these peanut butter filled pretzels are dire wolves. Okay, go.
Yeah. If you're doing a thing like that, heavily suggest small candies,
Yep.
because goldfish, yeah, they all kind of look the same. But with Skittles, you can separate, by color different enemies. With
You
gummy
can.
bears, you can separate by color different enemies. And if you have slightly larger than just one square enemies, gummy worms,
Yep. And what's also
especially
really
if they are
fun,
sour gummy worms and I am playing a barbarian.
yeah, if what's really fun about if you have the edible enemies, you can learn a lot about your players, as some of them, myself included, will prioritize what they're attacking based on what they want to eat.
Yep.
Like, I will say this now. If you make enemies out of peanut butter filled pretzels, I don't care how tactically unsound it is to kill all of those first. I will annihilate those things because I love peanut butter filled pretzels.
See, and on the flip side, I would completely avoid those enemies because I'm allergic to peanut butter.
See, and that's where we would be on a good team together.
It would
We'd
be
do well.
perfect.
Yeah.
Just like give me all them enemies that are represented by gummy bears. Oh, they mine.
Yeah.
They mine.
So yeah, I love it for various reasons. And I mean, one of the fun reasons when we were able to play in person, I'm very
Mhm.
excited that for our upcoming finale in just a couple weeks here, we get to play in person
Yeah.
again. But part of the fun is just hanging out and having snacks with your friends. Like
Mhm.
snacks are part of game night. So make it part of the combat. It's not
Yeah.
cost prohibitive. And when those enemies die, you don't have to put you don't have to put the
Yeah.
mini away now. You just hand it to somebody, let them eat it.
And I'll say that's another big thing in the like pro of using physical battle maps and minis is that you get a whole lot of that fun of board game night because
Yes,
I mean tabletop role playing games, they are board games.
they are.
And so these battle maps and physical minis, they are the board game part, and it can be a whole lot of fun to have that. But I think we should pivot for a moment and talk about reasons why other reasons why you would specifically want to do physical minis from a gameplay standpoint rather than
Sure.
just it's fun. And we've
Well,
talked a bit about like the distancing
mhm.
and being able to count that, which I personally think is one of the biggest reasons.
I would put it at number one.
Absolutely. Um,
I can tell you my number two
Go for it.
is if the environment changes during the battle.
Yes.
It's much easier to represent that visually as opposed to just having to describe it to your players and they have to understand. If you're going, oh, the volcano has now erupted and there's lava coming down, you can visibly
Mm-hmm.
show where that lava is.
Yep.
Or, well, now this building's on fire and you can show which one is on fire, and your players have to decide how they want to conduct things from that. And I think that is massive when you have an actual physical map with minis in front of you, being able to
Mm-hmm.
alter it and change it to show, oh, here's the destruction that's taking place, or here's how much closer this, army of the dead that's coming to destroy this town. You got to get out of here before they get here. Here's how much closer they are now. Like
Mm-hmm.
giving that actual representation for anything that's changing about the environment, I think having an actual map is the most useful whatsoever.
Yep, that is also my number two on that list.
Yeah.
Is like specifically when things change, when things are dynamic, it's so much easier if you have the stuff uh to do that. And
Yes.
that kind of swings into the last thing on the list that I wanted to talk about with using physical minis was some of the reasons why you would want to choose to do physical minis as opposed to some of the other ways of doing combat. One of the big reasons why is, especially as a DM, is that much like you prep with story, you can prep your combat and you can prep like your area of where you want the combat to be, and you can have that stuff ready so that it's not a thing that you need to be thinking about while controlling your
Right.
enemies and while controlling your combat. And that's a real big reason why you would want to pick this one over other types as a DM, is because you can pre-plan it. I mean, obviously some things you have to just be able to pull and like, okay, this needs to change quickly because these fucking idiots burnt down this place. But
Again.
but because obviously you have to have that spontaneity as a DM. But
Right.
being able to pre-plan as well as being able to set out like, okay, this is how many enemies that I have for them for this, so you don't need to think about and remember and count later while you're in the thick of doing plot stuff. You
Yes.
can just like, all right, here's my stack of enemies that I knew I was going to need for this, and here they are. It also can help with tracking hit points.
Yep.
If you have like, this enemy looks different, so you can have like your little cheat sheet, whatever you use. A lot of times I just like to use a piece of paper and just write it down, or like the sticky notes app on my computer. uh but it's so much easier to be like, all right, this is the blue one, this is the green one,
Yep.
this is the red one, rather
Exactly.
than just trying to remember like, okay, this one was hit, then this one was hit, then that one was hit, and then this one was hit again. But now they've moved, uh and it can save you a lot of headache as a
It can.
DM.
I think there's one last honorable mention that I have to give to why this
Absolutely.
method of combat is amazing. I won't lie, of all methods of combat, this one is my favorite. And this may be the reason why it's my favorite, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the reveals. One
Yes.
is the reveal of the map itself. It's exciting. Like you as the DM, you get to reveal your work. You've
Mm-hmm.
spent time on this. You thought about it. Your players see it. There's oohs and
It's
ahs.
just so cinematic.
Yeah. And honestly, as a DM, I can attest, it doesn't matter what in the blue hell you reveal. It can be only a handful of squiggles. Your players see it and they react. They're excited. It's
Mm-hmm.
a map. They're already trying to figure out what stuff is. And they'll
Yep.
ask, oh, what does this line represent? What's that? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're instantly involved. But the other reveal I love is when you put your monster minis on the map,
Yeah.
especially if there's something big.
Mm-hmm.
Like you do that, and then they're like, okay, your players position where they are. You go, okay, here's what you see, and then you set down a dragon, and
Yep.
they will clown, and it will
Or
be amazing.
you just, and even if you don't have the actual mini, just grabbing something big that's the approximate size, just like, all right, here's our battle map. Here's your character, and here's what you're fighting.
Yeah, exactly.
And just
Like
like,
a roll, you
oh
put like
god,
a coffee mug on there.
yeah, just,
Like, what
oh
is
god,
that?
what is
Yeah.
that, and why is it so much bigger than us?
Exactly. I think the reveals are so awesome.
Yeah.
Get that reaction right away, and that reaction you can't. I don't think you could replicate it any other way as much as you can with the minis because they're in 3 dimensions.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the second type of encounter running that you can do in
Yep.
tabletop games, and this one has boomed during the pandemic because we have
Yes, it
been
has.
because we've been on computer, we've been on Zoom because we haven't been able to safely be around a table with each other, and this is the virtual tabletop, and there are a bunch of different programs that are out now that
Yep.
you can use. I mean, Tabletop Simulator, a very inexpensive game that you can put up on Steam. That's
Yep.
also in VR now, which
It
is
is.
wild, and I haven't had a chance to really play with it yet.
Obviously,
like-
Roll20 is very popular.
Roll20 is very popular. There's Foundry Virtual Tabletop that I found
Yep.
that is really fun. And this is a big one for the pandemic because you can share whatever that virtual tabletop is over to your players, and you can play, you know, on your computers while you're split all the way up. If you happen to have a fancy schmancy dual screen setup like I've got, your player can have their stats on one screen and the tabletop on the other, or like the video of you of your actual faces over here and the map up here, and it's great.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
yeah.
I would say just the accessibility of it might be my biggest pro for it.
Yeah.
It's accessible. It is affordable. Like a lot of these sites or apps or any of them,
Mhm.
a lot of them are free.
Yes,
There are a
many
lot
of
of
them
the-
have a free option.
Yeah,
Uh,
you obviously don't get all the bells and whistles, but the fact of the matter is, you can have a visual representation for your combat for no money that everyone can see. And I'm always a big fan of anything that
Mhm.
people have access to for free. I do pay for certain services. You know, I factor that into my monthly
Yeah.
budget.
because
But
you
I
like the
don't.
bells and whistles.
Yeah, I do. But I also don't like. I don't like it when hobbies become cost prohibitive because that's exclusionary on a class level, and I'm not about that.
Yeah.
Like D&D should be for everybody. The books can be expensive, but again,
Yep.
if you get a group of people going together on just the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide, you can make that work. Plus, the basic
Yep.
rules are online for free.
Yep, most tabletop games you'll find you can get at least the basic rules for free. So
Yeah.
if you have a friend that really likes to play a particular game and you want to play it with them, like chances are they'll have the resources and they'll be able to share them with you, which
Exactly.
is so nice. And a big shout out to the programming community for all these virtual tabletops that
Yeah,
I haven't found a virtual tabletop yet that does not have a free option.
agreed. And so the
And
fact you could have
it's
just
so cool.
Yeah, you could have the base rules of D&D, which are free. You could have a free Roll20 account, and you could use
Hmm.
something like Discord for your chat, which is also free.
Hmm.
You could play D&D with a visual representation for no money, and it's not going to feel like a lesser game. Like the base
No.
rules are are great. They're really all you need to play fifth edition. Like, yeah, having all the other books and all that is it's fun. And some people like me get over obsessed with all of it because I'm a dork.
Hmm.
But you can have a great game of D&D with just the base rules, and you can go on Roll20 and you can have some amazing encounters set up on there, and they look great and they don't cost you anything. So
And one
the
of the
accessibility is my favorite
Yeah.
thing about
And one of the nicest things that I've found with a lot of these virtual tabletops is that although they have specific like map packs
it.
for
Yes,
particular systems, they're all built to be able to be used in whatever system you like to play. So maybe
they
it's
are.
D&D 5th, maybe it's 3.5, maybe it's Pathfinder, maybe it's Starfinder, maybe it's D20 Modern, maybe it's
Yep.
Big Eyes Small Mouth, maybe you just bought and on the Kickstarter you backed Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which I highly recommend.
It's a
Uh
great book.
it's
Great
so
book.
good. But all of these virtual tabletop system programs are set up to be used with whatever system you have and you want to play it,
Exactly.
and that's really what brings me to the big like column for this segment, so to speak, is the like when to use this one. And obviously with virtual tabletops, the when to use this is when you can't be together.
Yes. It is you know, we've been using it ourselves for a year and a half
Hmm.
now. I think we can all agree it's not the same.
No, it's definitely
But
not.
it is the next best thing.
Yeah.
Being able to have those physical maps, being able to have tokens to move around to represent the characters and monsters. Is it the same as the 3D? No,
No.
it's not. But I also don't feel cheapened
Yeah. And
by the
it's
experience.
and one of the pros that I can say for a virtual tabletop as opposed to a physical tabletop is that it is much easier as a DM to get an accurate representation of whatever creature or enemy you're putting on the board.
I was
Like,
just going to
yeah,
say,
you don't have to have like if you're playing D&D and you're getting down to the big end times of it, you don't have to have that $500 Tiamat mini that's the size of a cat. Um,
you don't have to have it, but you want it.
you can just force your players to zoom out on the map and
Yep.
drop the honkin' tile onto the map screen.
Yes, you can.
And you know how much that tile costs? A quick Google search for the image.
Exactly. And I'm with you. That is one of my favorite things. Whatever you need, all it takes is the time to do the image search. There are token makers online that are free.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the time to edit the art that people have willingly put out there
Mm-hmm.
to share. And you can get amazing map backgrounds for free.
Yep.
You can find some great independent artists and that sell map backgrounds. And I
Mm-hmm.
recommend if you have the coin to spare,
Yep.
go ahead and back those artists.
Because it's a great way to throw a little extra money at artists,
Yeah,
especially we're still in a pandemic.
yeah.
Artists still aren't making money. Uh,
And
if you have it, throw it to some artists in this way.
I will
Um,
even say that I think it's you can modify that map even easier than you can a 3D because all you have to do is just replace the image of the map.
Mhm.
The Kraken battle you guys had, where
Yeah.
it was a series of maps that I found from an artist that it was meant to be this battle against the Kraken. So as each round passed, you could change it and more tentacles were on the deck. It was dynamic and it added excitement to the battle. And
Mhm.
that's the kind of thing I could have never done with a physical.
It would have been so much harder to do. You would have had to have had actual like 3D tentacles
Yeah.
that you were able to put on the boat or something like that.
Which
And
I,
I mean,
I will say,
you could do that with like gummy worms.
right.
I'm just obsessed with gummy worms because
Ain't
I
nothing
love
wrong with
them.
that.
Uh,
No, ain't nothing wrong with that. They're delicious. but yeah, I love being able to just change the map on the fly. The fact
Mm-hmm.
that as a DM, you can place your monsters and you can have them on a level where only you can see them
Mm-hmm.
until you do the reveal. Like that's great to just show your players, oh, here's where this shit is. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's fun. And
Yeah.
and again, all the cool art you can find and not having to worry. Like there was a while trying to find a beholder mini was the hardest thing in the world
Yeah.
about a year ago. You just couldn't find one.
Yep.
All I have to do, Google image search, beholder. There it is. I have
Yep.
one now.
I think it was partly because there were a couple of very popular campaign settings that had a lot of beholders that had gained some traction on the DM's Guild website, and
Definitely.
that had a little to do with it, where everyone was just like, "Oh, we need beholders."
I mean, and let's face it, if you are a DM and you do collect minis, you need a beholder.
You really do.
You,
Uh,
you just need one. At some point,
yeah,
your players have to fight a beholder.
it's one of those classic, like if you're playing D&D, that is a classic D&D monster. You
Yep.
gotta do it. Much like if you're playing Starfinder, the classic is eventually you're gonna have a ship battle. Like
You have to.
you're gonna have a starship battle. It's going to happen.
It's a guarantee. It's a guarantee.
Uh, but so and with virtual tabletops, there's also so many tools that are built in for your players that are
Yes.
nice. Like I think all of them have a built-in dice roller.
Yep.
Many of them have ways for you to put your character sheet actually into the app so that if you don't have multiple screens like some of us that are privileged enough to have multiple screen setups, uh hey, I found my privilege.
Yeah, there it is. Took you a minute.
There are very few besides being a dude.
You
But
have two monitors.
that was that's the dumbest thing I've said online yet. No, it's not.
No.
No, it's not. I did that whole show with Brendan Mack. Which God, I loved doing that show. Uh, but no, that contains probably the most dumb and ridiculous things I've said on the internet.
Oh,
Anyway,
don't sell yourself short. I'm sure you've said far more stupid things.
you're not wrong. But some of them weren't recorded. Uh, but yeah, that's one of the great things about virtual tabletops is that they have all of these things built in, so that if you don't have a whole lot of dice, they have dice rollers built in. If
Yep.
you aren't that good at keeping yourself together, they have built-in places to keep your stats.
Yep.
As a DM, many of them have built-in stats for monsters for all different systems, uh, as well
Roll
as
20. So Roll 20, for example,
Mhm.
has hit point trackers. So
Yes.
you don't have to track the hit points for all your monsters. You click on it and you subtract how much damage it took, and it will do it for you. As long as you put their hit points in before the battle, which
Mm-hmm.
for me, in big battles with lots of monsters, super helpful.
Oh yeah, where it's one of those things that just the quality of life enhancement with having these tools is amazing.
Yes.
The downside, though, and I'm pretty sure we're of a same mind in this downside, is that the learning curve is
Yes.
so steep.
Yeah. Like I remember the first time I tried to use Rule 20, I just felt like a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what I was doing, and it's got a tutorial, but I didn't find it that helpful.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of know how to use it now. I know there are still features I don't know how to use, but I feel capable of using it, of running sessions with it. But
Mm-hmm.
it has a very steep curve, in my
Oh
opinion,
yeah.
and that can be daunting.
Yeah, and that's the same through just about every virtual tabletop that I've found online. Is just like they are so good, they have so many tools, but it takes a hot minute to figure out how to work them.
Yeah.
Like it's like learning how to do Excel. You just kind of have to like you have to look online for homemade tutorials
Yeah.
sometimes because the ones that they have on the website don't always cover the specific thing you're trying to do. Or maybe they just don't explain it in a way that works for your brain.
Yeah. So there's got to be some patience and some trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Like just know that you shouldn't sign up for your Roll20 account the morning that you're going to run a session on Roll20 for the first time. Give yourself a little bit of time to learn it, or do what I did, like ask a friend who knows how to use it to give you a crash course lesson. Like Phoenix hung out with me on Roll20 for like an hour and a half,
right?
Just taught me how to use it.
And it's really that's one of the biggest things that the biggest low for virtual tabletops is the setup time, as well as the time just to learn how to use the program. Whereas like with Theater of the Mind or using physical minis, I mean, you know how to do things in the physical world, probably.
Right.
If you know, depending on, I mean, if you have the ability to play the game, you most likely have the ability to understand how to use these physical minis and put them in place.
Odds are very high.
Odds are very high.
Even if you need the physical minis, like for a map, you can grab some grid paper and a couple pens, and you can draw a map in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah,
real quick.
There's not really there. Under most circumstances, there's not a big hurdle to jump with. Like, okay, how do I use the map? It's a grid. All right,
there it is. I do have, this is a small one, but I do find this can also be a bit kind of iffy for me on the virtual one. And that is remembering to think in 3 dimensions when you're looking at 2 dimensions.
yes.
I say this as a DM, where often I have had monsters that have the ability to fly that should be more difficult for my players to defeat. But I forget to have them go change where they're at on that Z axis because I'm only looking at the XY. Whereas with minis, I would go, okay, I'm going to place something underneath it like a shot glass to represent that it's flying, and go, okay, now it's X number of feet up in the air.
Which, by the way, that's a great tip for using physical minis. Yep. Shot glasses. They're great for like 10 feet up, because most often shot glasses are clear and you can have something underneath it.
Sure can. That's a great way to go.
One.
It's flying. How do you remember it's flying? Boom. So it's on it. It's on top of a shot glass. There.
Yep.
Now I know that one's flying. So
and virtual tabletops, you can't do that. That's a great thing to remember. That I honestly it passed my mind.
Yeah, like I know Roll20, you have the different like markers that can appear on a token in the corner. Some of them are a little hard to see.
They're so easy to forget.
Yeah, and so I definitely have found myself forgetting about the 3 dimensions there. But that's my one mechanics issue where I don't totally love it. But the learning curve is, to me, that's the big one.
Yeah, that's the biggest barrier is the learning curve. But it's not the worst barrier.
No.
You know what I mean? Because unlike some other barriers in tabletop, this is one of those barriers that's only for the DM.
Yes.
It's one of those ones that, like, all right, this is difficult for me as the DM, but I can do it on my own and handle it before my players show up. As opposed to some other barriers in pen and papers, like needing dice, like needing to remember to do all the freaking math. The daunting ability or want to stay in character.
Right.
That is difficult for people. That's one, like, the learning curve of learning how to use a virtual tabletop is very much a DM problem that everyone doesn't have to deal with.
And also, it's one that once you learn how to use it, it's no longer a problem.
Yes, it's not one that you need to keep practicing that much.
Yeah, like I guess the only other knock I could say on it is when you get to the point that you are able to start playing together again, unless you've got a playing service with like a projection screen that you can hook a computer up to. Like you need some specific technology to be able to use a virtual tabletop in a real life
Mm-hmm.
situation. But that said, when you're using it when people are distanced and playing online, it's kind of unbeatable.
Yeah, and it also and a good thing for it is it also it opens up your gaming groups.
Yes.
So like our game that you ran when we played Curse of Strahd, we couldn't have had that same game without virtual tabletops.
No.
Because of like what, three of us were in the same state.
Yep. And the other our other player lived in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. Like
So,
we
yeah,
would not have had the same game. It would not
exactly.
have
Like,
been nearly as fun if we didn't have that capability.
and you could, yeah, that's one of the beauties of the virtual tabletops and playing online. You can play with people around the world,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty fucking cool when you think
Yeah.
about it.
Now we should
Uh,
probably shift on, just looking at the clock.
yeah,
We shift on to our third and personally my favorite of the combat styles, and that is Theater of the Mind.
theater of the mind gets a bad rap from a lot of people, I think,
Yeah.
and I think it's unfair that it gets a bad rap.
Yep.
Yes, there aren't physical minis, and you're not seeing everything in 3D. But let me tell you, it generally moves the fastest of
Yes.
any kind of combat because you're not going to get bogged down as a player of looking at everything at every angle. Okay, what's the
Mm-hmm.
best way I can do? You just find out whether or not you can do something.
And that's one of the things with Theater of the Mind that I think is a reason that people dislike it so much, is because there are a lot of players that like to do combat as though they're playing Fire Emblem. And I get it, because I too am a tactician and I love
Right.
strategy games like that. But there's a time and place.
Yes.
And there's no reason to slow down an entire session of combat just because you're doing the mental math of like, all right, let me go and figure out like, all right, I can get just this right angle and throw a lightning bolt here and it only hits this amount of the enemies, and like you don't need to take all the time doing that. You don't
Exactly.
need to slow everyone down. And with Theater of the Mind, you can just ask your DM like, "Hey, do you think I could do this in 30 feet?" And the DM most likely is just gonna go, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Yeah. Most often in theater of the mind, you're going to start close enough to the enemies to get into melee with them, and they
Mm-hmm.
start close enough to get into melee with you.
Yeah.
With some minor exceptions, like if you make it clear as an adventuring group, okay, the barbarian and the cleric, they're up front, the rangers kind of in the middle, and the wizards hanging back.
Mm-hmm.
A DM's probably not going to go, okay, well, this thing charges up to the wizard and goes stab, stab, because the rest of the players would go, we made it
But
clear we
but
interposed ourselves.
yeah, but we made a wall.
Yeah. So, you know, um, I think it also allows you to be sort of like the most forgiving of both player and DM, either about forgetting things or just going, we're not going to worry about that right
Yeah.
now. Like, oh, but you mentioned this one's attacking me, so maybe because I want to arrange, this would be disadvantage, and the DM might go, whatever, just make an attack roll. Don't worry about it. Like,
Yeah.
let's keep it moving.
And it's very much the reason why it's my personal favorite style of combat comes into the when to use it
Mhm.
as opposed to the others. And the when to use it is when it's going to be a little quick combat that isn't going to take that much time. Maybe the scenario's kind of lackluster or boring, or it's just a quick like, all right, we're going to duck around this corner and slit this guard's throat.
Right.
And like maybe that's a 1 or 2 round combat. I don't want to have to set up a whole thing just for that.
Precisely. It is something you're going to go to the most often,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have big, long, drawn out boss battles that are purely theater of the mind, and there are some
Absolutely.
DMs that are incredible at
Yes.
doing theater of the mind battles. Chris Perkins is
Yes.
a genius at it.
Chris
And
Perkins is amazing at it. And
Chris
also,
Perkins is amazing. Like, let's
Chris
just,
Perkins is just amazing. But
but
it's
go ahead.
it's a thing that you can just go to, and it's also a good way to, as a DM, kind of practice your storytelling, because you have the combat in your mind and you're able to describe these things, and you always have these concrete anchor points that you can come back to help you build out this imagination of the space that you're in and be able to describe it. So rather than trying to describe, like, this is how the whole room looks like, this is what this looks like, you can just use your player's characters as an anchor point and be like, all right, so 20 feet away from you is the wall,
Right.
30 feet ahead of you is the other wall with a door on it, those kind of things. And it can help you practice for the bigger moments where you need to describe things.
And one other thing to love about it, we've talked about how non-cost prohibitive the whole online experience is. Um, as long as you can afford some notebook paper and a pencil to write down like the hit points and stuff of your monsters, a DM, it's free.
Yep. Yeah. There's nothing more free than your imagination.
It don't cost nothing. And I won't even mention the cost of dice, because there are virtual dice rollers online. There are a lot of ways to make the dice
I mean,
happen.
it does cost you mental labor.
It does.
But
Definitely does.
if you're playing, you were probably already spending that anyway.
Without question. Without question. But
go ahead.
I would say, but the whole theater of the mind, it's crucial, like you said, for those shorter encounters. If this is going to be, and even if it's not like something in a town, if it's a random encounter,
Yes.
let's say, I love random encounter tables. I find them enjoyable, but you can't have a map for every random encounter table because they're random. And if you want to have some randomness to it, that means you're not necessarily going to have all the minis on hand. Your players don't have to wait for the combat to begin. Yeah. It's very simple, where you have them roll whatever they're going to roll. It comes up, okay, random encounter, and you're going, okay, as you guys are going through the forest, you come to this small clearing, and all of a sudden you see this massive, insert whatever monster it was, here, roll initiative.
Yep.
Like, it's just that simple, where you used to be like, roll initiative, we're doing this, and combat begins.
As well as Theater of the Mind is the easiest to combine different things, if that makes sense, where you're not like trying to layer a map on itself. Maybe your homebrew game is a thing that I'm personally working on, is a time warp campaign, so you've got like fantasy characters in a modern setting, or vice versa.
Right.
And those are going to be harder to do with actual physical maps and minis, or even a lot of the virtual tabletops. But Theater of the Mind, you can have some fun describing a sidewalk to these characters that have never seen a modern sidewalk before.
Yes.
And that can be the most fun. Obviously, a big negative to Theater of the Mind is for those tacticians, it's not great.
Yep.
And for people who aren't as practiced at imagining things, people who, I don't know, have ADHD or things like that.
It can be difficult.
Who have trouble focusing, it can be difficult. And so those are big knocks to it. But usually it moves fast enough that even if you are like me and have trouble focusing, you can still get after it pretty easily.
Yeah, I could say as a DM, you got to make sure you don't have way too many monsters out there.
Yeah.
Because when there's no visual representation of where things are, I recommend drawing a little sketch on your paper where you're keeping track of hit points, just to have an idea of where stuff might be, and also so you can keep track of what's out there, because it's really easy to lose track of who's where, who's near what. Like, make little notes to yourself of like, okay, this skeleton moved up next to the fighter, got it. This one is trying to hide from the rogue. Like, make those little notes. And for me, if it's like a group of generic monsters, like we'll use skeletons for example, I won't use these for the player's sake, but just so I can keep track of things, I will give them names. It will be like, Adam, Bob, Cliff, Dave. Okay, I have those there. So I'm like, all right, Adam move next to the fighter. Dave's hiding here, and then
Mhm.
Bob and Cliff are both going to try and take out the cleric.
Yeah. I would say the easiest thing in Theater of the Mind is if you are playing a fantasy tabletop, and there is going to be magic, as well as in many of the sci-fi tabletops that exist.
Yeah,
Characters being invisible, so easy to do in Theater of the Mind, because you
much
just
easier.
describe it's invisible.
Yep. You see this thing turn invisible, and now you don't see
It's
it.
now you don't see it.
Yeah. And if a player is like, I'm going to turn invisible, you can much more reward that invisibility
Hmm.
because it's, when we talked about that 3D, and again, I love the maps and all that, sometimes it's hard to not know what you know. When it's
Yeah,
like, oh, this thing's invisible. And some would say, well, someone could just take their mini off the map and keep track of where they are. That's harder than it sounds.
it really is.
It's actually a pain in the ass.
Um, and I mean, if you've been following some of the other things that we've talked about how to have a successful group around your table, you won't have this. But like if you are going and like playing Adventurers League somewhere where
Yeah.
you don't already know everyone, or you're meeting up with a new group of friends to play, uh people lie.
Yes, they do.
Just straight up, eh,
Yep.
people lie. And
Yeah,
invisibility is one of the easiest ways to lie. Uh
exactly. And theater of the mind, it keeps everyone honest about it.
it really does. And that's one big boon for Theater of the Mind, is that people can't cheat as easily
Yeah.
when they can't see things to cheat off of.
And I think it's also a realm where more than anything else, I see players trying to like jockey for an advantage far less. Like
Hmm.
in theater of the mind, they're not going to ask so much about flanking. Like that is, flanking's optional, but most
Hmm.
people I know play with it. Um,
Yeah, and the most effort you're gonna get is like, hey, if I use my movement, can I get around to flanking? Absolutely. Or no, this thing's too big, or it's
yeah,
standing in a corner.
yeah, you're like, the angle's not really good on it. Like, they'll go, okay, and they'll just make their regular attack.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to be said for it. I think it's a great help to a lot of the martial classes because again, your DM's probably going to be like, yep, you're close enough to get into melee with this crap because we're
And you
having a
just
fight.
do it.
Yeah. Um, it's not as helpful if you're playing purely ranged classes like that. Those are the
Hmm.
one where you can feel a little nerfed by it when your DM's like, yep, it's close enough that this ogre is going to run up and hit you with their club. You're going, but I thought I was 60 feet away. Nope, sure aren't. What's your armor
Yeah.
class?
Yeah.
So
And that's, yeah, I'd say that's the biggest divide between like if you do Theater of the Mind or you don't, is the composition of your group. If your
yeah,
group is mostly range stuff and widespread stuff and area of effect stuff, you're gonna want to get some grid paper and draw it out, bud.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like there are times you just need to. Um, but the fun of theater of the mind is because everyone's already imagining the combat. I think it's easier to get your players invested when you're like, okay, so your attack, what does that look like? Oh, you cast this spell, what does that look
Hmm.
like? Like their imaginations are already kicked in. Not that D&D isn't already a game of the imagination, because it is, but
Yeah.
everything you can do to build on the imagination being active. I think in theater of the mind, you can get much more. Okay, so what does that look like? Oh, what does your sword look like? More and more, like you can make your
Mm.
players describe everything. And if you're going, we're never going to have a visual representation for anything, it can work really well. And if anybody wants evidence of that, look at any live play D&D game that is in podcast form.
Yep.
I submit the Adventure Zone
Yep.
to
Adventure Zone
anyone.
is great to see
Yeah,
Theater of the Mind being used, because they don't even really use like any kind of minis or stuff at their table when they're recording.
no, it's just all spoken out, and that's how things are, and it
Hmm.
works great. And I think their games are exciting. and they move quickly, and they never had combat that really dragged out. Again, theater of the mind combat doesn't drag out anywhere
Yep.
near as much, because if you have minis or even the virtual, you're going to have moments where your players are trying to play chess and they're like, okay, if I don't set the piece down, my turn isn't over, and they'll be measuring and looking every
Mhm.
last way. Whereas theater of the mind, they're just going to go, okay, I move up to it and I attack it, or I cast fireball. Like
It's,
that's
am I in range? No. All right, can I move into range? Yeah. I
yeah,
move into range and then I do it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, theater of the mind. It's I think one of the reasons it gets a bad rap is because it's a little scary for some people. I
Yeah,
think
it
to
takes it takes a lot of mental effort as a DM.
it does, and I think people are afraid of looking or feeling dumb by engaging their imaginations too
Yeah.
much because I think they think of it as being childish, and
Yeah.
I don't
Which
think
is
people should. That shouldn't be an insult.
it's
Like,
completely ridiculous. You're playing a tabletop role-playing game. It's a
yes,
game. It's supposed to be fun and
yeah,
ridiculous, and you're supposed to just enjoy doing the things that you don't get to do that often, especially as adults in a capitalistic society,
exactly. Like,
which is
yeah,
yeah.
enjoy the fun of it. Like, yeah, you get to feel like a kid in the best way,
Yeah.
where you're just playing pretend with your friends and having a great time. Yes, we all know you are not actually a halfling wizard. We're aware of this. However, when we're gathered around the table or we're all on our headsets or
Hmm.
whatever situation it is, you're no longer yourself. You're
Yeah.
now that halfling wizard. That's how we see you, and that's how we appreciate you. And so sling those spells, describe them.
Yeah. And that's really one of the greatest things about all three of these styles of combat is that they all have their merit, but
They
at the
do.
end of the day, they're all just around to help you play.
Yeah, because as you even said, and we've both said on this stream, it's a game. Games are supposed to be fun,
Hmm.
and use the one that's going to enhance your game the most for whatever time you're using it. I mean, whether you're virtual or in person, theater of the mind's going to get used,
Yep,
or it should, in my opinion, because
absolutely.
if it's a quick encounter and I'm a player, don't
Don't take the
drag the
time.
map and the minis out and all that. Like, this will be quick. Save that for the big fight.
Yeah.
Like, don't make me numb to that. I want that to still be exciting.
And so as we're winding down to the end of our time here, uh, I hope that I hope that what we've said through this episode has gotten your brain working a bit on when to use which one and when which one's going to be most effective, so that you don't take too long deciding between them in your prep,
And
as
also,
well as you have other things in your brain to use when you're prepping.
exactly. And also that you neither rely only on one or completely nix one for whatever reason, be it the fear of imagination for theater of the mind or thinking that minis and maps are too cost prohibitive. Because I can assure you, grid paper doesn't cost much, and you can buy a big old box of M&Ms, and
Yep.
you've got your monsters.
Yep. And that's really the biggest thing for all three of these is
Yeah,
you can use any and all of them and should interchangeably.
of course.
Like the virtual tabletop is probably going to be tougher to use interchangeably if you know your whole group is living nearby and are all vaccinated, so it's safe. But you know, you can certainly try.
You can find ways. There are ways, dude.
There are projectors.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got money like that, you can put a screen into a table.
Oh, you can.
Which I've seen some setups like that, and they're really really cool.
They really are.
But so as we get to our last minute, Bjorn, do you have any last things to say before we go into the end spiel?
Yeah, I would just say talk to your players about what they prefer. And
Hmm.
whatever their preference is, make sure you use it sometimes. Not every time, but sometimes. if you have multiple players who are like, I love maps and minis, make it happen at some point.
Absolutely. And of course, don't forget about your own favorites because
Yes.
you are playing as well, even as the DM. You are
Yeah,
still playing. Never forget that.
exactly.
All
And
right.
as much work as it is, it needs to still be fun for the DM too.
Mm-hmm. So that is our episode on fighting. I hope that these three styles of combat and our explanations of them and when to use them helped you out or will help you out in the future. Uh, as always, I will do my best to make sure that this episode is back up on our YouTube channel on Saturday at noon. Uh, let's see, what are the other things to say as we're closing? Please do all the internet things so we can try and
Yes.
get Internet Daddy's money. Because again,
We need it more than they do.
Internet Daddy can buy us things.
Exactly.
Internet
Do it.
Daddy can get Bjorn a computer.
There's hoping. We're inching that way, 1 inch at a time.
Let's see. As far as things that are going on, do remember that we are this is episode 45, and we will be getting to episode 50, which will be our last episode before a big break, before we jump into the planning and effort and figuring out how to do this process of getting a full campaign up here online for you, which will
That's
be
the goal.
super fun.
Yes.
We've as a group we've already been making characters for quite some time.
Yeah.
Bjorn's been making the world for quite some time. It's gonna be fun to watch, y'all.
My
but yeah.
brain is goo.
And I'm in talks with a few local theaters to maybe make it so we can have some live episodes
Which would be amazing.
of our campaign, which would be super cool.
Yeah, it would.
But that's all for the future.
It is. That's for not today us.
Yep. But you know how you can learn about all those things in real time is
You do the
follow
internet
our different
things.
Yeah, you do the internet things. Follow our social media pages,
Do
whether
it.
that be Facebook or the Instagram that we are actually getting some work done into actually being able to post on it more reliably so there's something to follow.
There you go.
And that's also for future us, but keep eyes on because we're doing things.
Har.
All right. Everyone have a great time. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you for watching. And
Thank you so
Bjorn,
much.
what do we always say?
Do something nice for yourself this weekend.